this work behind me, in looking, I see nothing.
Yeah.
But I want, I want to hear your thoughts on this piece, but I also want to hear how you think of your work. It's in this context of the American South. So all these conversations that we're having are taking place
Hmm.
sort of in that context. So have you considered that? Did you consider that when you were submitting works for the show?
Um, I think the South is a perfect context for, these kind of works where you have this long history of, you know, Black people. But then also it's a shared history too, because from what the little that I know, white Southerners, I mean, apart from the the apparent like fairy telling of Hollywood and stuff like that, white Southerners, if you read Uncle Tom's Cabin, they had a unique relationship with the Black American counterparts as opposed to Northerners, and then so that kind of genuinely looking at each other and perception. I think that painting 482 speaks even more so poignantly at that relationship, because I remember reading through Uncle Tom's Cabin when I was creating and think and drawing and doing drawings about this. I mean, drawings for this work. But the thing is, I never used anything to kind of indicate that just because I knew I've never been to the South. I never had any conversations with anyone that I knew that was from the South, so I didn't want to tackle it that way head on, just because I feel like it would be disingenuous. But um, how I did do it is tackling it from what I know, like religion, and the white figure in that kind of Renaissance garb that's blurred or yeah, that's blurred in a sense. He I lifted that character from a painting of the Italian painter Caravaggio, Michael Michelangelo Demerdi what Demerisi de Caravaggio. Yeah, I butchered the name, but yeah, Caravaggio was one of my very very early influences, and I love his paintings still today. So yeah, it's the Calling of Saint Matthew. But the funny thing about that painting is there's this hand that points out from the right side of the painting. Matthew is on the left, but nobody knows, and it's the hand of Christ pointing to say call, but there are like three or four people around the table, but nobody really knows who is Matthew. So people make that assumption that that figure is Matthew, and it's about that confusion, like who is it, me? Yeah, and then using that kind of framework to talk about how there's this kind of cognitive dissonance with understanding the other, both from the Black side and from the white side, as I perceive it. um yeah, so that's what I was thinking about in a nutshell. Also, to 482, that number I came up is, it's the number that they estimated that the maximum capacity of slaves that could be held in an average slave ship. So 482 bodies could be held there. And I'm just thinking, and I told this story on Saturday, that the 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 the, the ship hands, they were called slavers. And this was not an occupation that 90% of them chose by choice. They were like usually debtors. So there were drunk guys that were usually rung up a high debt in the bar, right? And then when the slave captain got his charter, because this is how it worked. A company like the Dutch East India Company would buy several fleets of ships. They'd pay a captain a sum of money, right? And then the captain would go out and by any means necessary get a crew. and these were not like necessarily professional people, but he'd usually go to the bars and find the drunk guys that were super in debt and couldn't pay the debt, and then pay the debt off. So they would be kind of indentured servants on the ship and force them on the ship to work. So they were called slavers. So both slaves and slavers neither wanted to be on the ship. And it's kind of, to me, the same kind of duality that I understand the American experience from, the history of slavery to be. It's very complex, but at the same time, each party has its own story and way to view it, and a way to view the other, So that was my thinking in kind of creating that piece.
Yeah, I think it definitely contributes to that theme of that these stories, they seem fragmented, but they're really all one story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have
And
never been to the South, but this work
yeah.
is positioned so well in this context.
Yes, thank you so much. And but at the same time, although I am, because this is what I try to do. I try to be honest in the work because I feel like painting, the act of painting, is only truth. If you lie in it, you can spot it. Anybody that's seeing it can spot it because the feeling won't come through. So although I talk about white people, I know fundamentally I'm not white. I have one white great grandmother, that's probably Irish, but my mom doesn't. My mom told me that like a couple of years ago. She only saw her once, and she saw her on a porch, and she never really talked to her because she was scared because she never saw a light-skinned white person before, so she was scared of the person, and she only met her once. But yeah, so that kind of thing, I I want to talk up. So in all of these issues, I just want to make it known that you know this is just very subjective. You know, but I think even through being subjective, if you're honest to the process, we can kind of glean some kind of truth from it. You know what I mean? So.